great to see everybody here today. This is like the brain trust of sustainable movement in Maine. My name is Scott Blom, and I work with the Center for Ecology-Based Economy in Norway. And Katie Bessie is here with me today, and she's on our board. And we're just going to talk a little bit about what CB does. We're the Center for an Ecology-Based Economy. So we're just going to kind of take you through just a little bit about how we got going. We're 5.5 years old, and then we're going to take you through kind of some projects that we've done over the last few years and a little bit of kind of the principles that we're based on. And then I'm going to show some examples of what I see as some ecology-based economy going on in the country right now that is, I think, really leading to economic democracy. So I'm going to do the first little section here, and then Catherine's going to take over, and then I'm going to finish up, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for some discussion afterwards. So we launched on Earth Day. Earth Day is our birthday every year, so we launched on Earth Day 5.5 years ago. We ran an Indiegogo campaign, which at the time we didn't even know what that was, and we saw some friends in New Mexico had done one to start a little, like a public education center at a garden center that had closed down, and they raised a bunch of money and started this great project. So we kind of threw an Indiegogo campaign together. We got a great video. Videographer gifted us with a beautiful video, and we raised about $30,000 to start off. So we rented a storefront in Norway, Maine. Some of you may know the place. We're next to the Fair Share Co-op. We actually rent from the co-op, and we rented this room called the Commons, which had been a community art gallery for a long time. We got our 501c3 the next year so we could accept donations and write grants. And we've gotten a lot of small project grants, and then just recently, I don't know who was here for the Climate to Thrive talk this morning, but we are now getting funded by the same funder they are for doing EV charging infrastructure and education in the area. And we got some pretty good funding from Sewell Foundation this year. So. But up until this point, we were pretty much on small project grants. We hold a lot of public events. Ethan, who just spoke before us here, was just at CB last winter. We just bring in lots of people to talk about what they're doing. We had Maine State climatologists come in. We show a lot of films, just anything we can do. We teach permaculture. We have a traditional setup. We have a board of directors. We have a great advisory board with a lot of people helping us out that way. And we're based in permaculture and transition town. Before we started CB, a little background, I was involved in the sustainable agriculture movement, specifically the organic seed movement for a long time. I worked for a company called Seeds of Change and was able to travel around this country and meet a lot of organic farmers, specifically seed growers. And at some point, we realized that local was the new organic, and we really wanted to work in our community. Some of us did a PDC, a permaculture designers course in 2006, and have been continuing to study permaculture. And then we also had a transition town training in our community, which is kind of permaculture based. So we've kind of built CB around that. We kind of, at all our board meetings, we start with a permaculture principle. We try to keep permaculture kind of on the surface, and I don't know, some people know exactly what I'm talking about, others may not. So I just put this in there. This is David Holmgren's permaculture website, permacultureprinciples.com, and he's broken down into 12 principles, but what I really want to talk about is the three in the middle there, and those are the permaculture ethics. And we feel like this movement towards economic democracy and any kind of sustainable development we're going to do has to be based in an ethical framework. So the permaculture ethics, and that circle on the top is always drawn as earth care. So every decision we make we try to figure out like what is the ramifications towards the ecology. And we can't take care of people unless we take care of the earth, because we live off of the earth. So in this model, anything that we consider in terms of an enterprise we want to consider is it regenerative to the earth. People care. We obviously have to take care of ourselves to be able to take care of our kin, to be able to take care of our community, to be able to take care of the earth. So these things are all obviously intertwined. And then the fair share ethic is the thorny one. And a lot of people just look at that and go, oh, well, everybody shouldn't get the same thing because, some people are laggards and other people work hard and people should be able to, it's capitalism and blah, 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 blah. That's not so much what the fair share ethic is about. It's more about permaculture is based on emulating natural cycles. Like we look at nature as our model before we design. It's a design, permaculture is about design. It's a design methodology, really. And we look at nature as our model. So when we look at nature, nature doesn't hoard surplus. Everything in nature gets ultimately redistributed back into the system. So we kind of look at that and try to be aware of our limits. And then when there's surplus created in the system, if we can put it back into the system, then we create more economic democracy, right? We work with a lot of partners. We really feel like that's, we're a tiny organization. There's, for the first time we have paid staff this year, like 2 half-time staff people and a board of directors and a lot of pretty committed volunteers. But, we do our best work when we can collaborate with other organizations. So we try to collaborate locally and regionally and even beyond occasionally. So just a couple of kind of, people are always like, well, what's ecology-based economy? Like, that's a great name. Like, what does it mean? So just in a few little points here, it's when we talk about ecology-based economy, we want to be regenerative, not degenerative. So always looking at our impact on natural systems. Are we restoring or are we exploiting? We see, and we've been doing a lot of talk, especially within the main network of food councils, about networked systems. We want to be lateral, networked, resilient. We don't want to be top-down and brittle. So we kind of, base our decisions about what we want to do on that. We want to think about the whole system. We want to think about all the externalities and the decisions that we're making. Where does that thing come from? What was the source of it, and then where is it going to finally end up? So we're looking at complete life cycle, kind of whole systems thinking. And at the end of the day, if we're going to build an ecology-based economy, it's just going to be driven by one thing, which is sunlight. That's the energy input into the system, right? We have this planet, it's finite amount of physical stuff, but we do have this energy input that is ultimately, not infinite, but for our intents and purposes really is infinite. We capture and utilize a tiny fraction of the sunlight that comes to the planet. So if we take that energy, and what we're talking about really is just managing that energy that's coming in, that's flowing in, and how we manage it to either regenerate or something else. So that's kind of what we're about. And then Katie's going to walk you through our four working groups.
Hi there. When I first discovered CV, I sort of stumbled in and realized here's an organization that's really attempting a new sort of small-scale community model that incorporates system thinking and permaculture directly in its structure and design, but also is an action-driven organization that is really getting things done through societal means for the environment. So really combining and consolidating all of these efforts. So that's what drew me in. And CB has 4 main categories here, working groups that we work under, including food, energy, shelter, and transport. And I'm just going to go on to give you some overview of some of the work that we've been doing in each category. So energy, we have some general goals to look at renewables and different scales of those renewables, so we can really, see the big picture of how we can start to implement renewables on the very local level, on the community scale, and also on the national and larger scales. We also have an eye for energy efficiency. We want to bring energy efficiency into our community and design for efficiency and also retrofit for efficiency in existing farm homes in our community. And we also want to understand where biofuels are appropriate. So these are the goals that overarch our energy working group. We also are very committed to conservation and working directly with our local land trust to network and engage our conservation efforts. Here is the first solar installation project of CB, which is at the Allendale Community Garden, one of the partners. And this is where we're really starting to both combine our energy vision with existing partners and the community garden network. We worked with Revision Energy to create this solar farm here in the Poland community, and also talk about how folks can increase their efforts for their own residential installations. And then at the state scale, we're also advocating for green energy policies that will allow more comprehensive projects.
Those were all posters for some workshops that we did at CB. And this was from the Revision project. It was the first community solar farm in Maine that we helped them work on.
And developing a model, which turned into essentially the bone structure at least. We are currently working on a large community-owned model for a solar farm based on this Sunshot Challenge, Solar in Your Community. And we are developing a solar farm structure that's in the works. So the Energy Working Group is really, playing with this model and looking at all the different ways this model can have strengths and weaknesses based on policy and advocating for policy as well. Our Transportation Working Group, our overarching goals are to lower our collective carbon footprint. We think that it's very important to talk about our footprint as something that we are approaching together and reduce our consumption and change the way we vote for these things. In doing so, we're also promoting healthy activities in the community, such as walking and biking and alternative transportation structures, and developing energy efficient and accessible public transportation through collaborations with the Northeast Rail Coalition and efforts to bring public transit back to our community. And as we've already somewhat discussed, we have done a huge amount of work in electric vehicle and electric bike infrastructure, including our EV Expo that we have as an annual event where we allow people to come and explore and experiment, drive electric vehicles, and with a huge electric vehicle charging infrastructure implementation that we've been building on slowly over the past 2.5 years. And another important thing for us is carpooling. We promote carpooling whenever possible with ourselves and with others in our community. We also have the CB Bike Share, which is something we've enacted in our community to allow folks to, if they drive into town or they're shopping in town or hanging out in town, they can take a bike for the day and use the bike to do all of their shopping. And this is really, it's been a really great program in terms of getting folks comfortable with, signing out a bicycle, using a bicycle, getting some exercise while they go about their daily activities. And also as we partner with different local groups, using these bikes to move from place to place. And here's some images of how the workshops in terms of maintaining the bikes sort of looks. We have a lot of volunteers that come in and help to refurbish bikes. We get bicycles donated, and we throw them into this common theme so that we can recognize them as they're out and about town. And it's also a way for the community to share skills. So those who know a lot about bicycles are teaching others actively about bicycles and encouraging folks to ride more. There they are, all lined up. And the Western Maine Electric Vehicle Charging Network project is really take it off. We were given some grant funding through an anonymous donor to really, because of the expertise we had, the skill sets, and the action-oriented goals, we were asked to implement a bunch of EV charging stations all throughout Western Maine, as you can see here. The existing ones are in green, and then we have proposed ones in yellow, and ones that are already in the planning stage in red. So getting around it with an electric vehicle is not a problem in Western Maine, as you may have already started to hear about.
Everything that on there that is planned is now in place, except for Buckfield and Freiburg, which will be going in the next couple of weeks.
And we have solar-powered, fill your tank from the sun, electric charging stations at the high school, as well as we have a very interesting off-grid electric charging station starting at one of our land trusts. So lots of interesting things in the works with the charging stations. And here we have an EV Expo, a shot of folks coalescing in our town to look at Teslas and Leafs and Bolts and all these different cars that you may have heard about but never had the chance to sit in or drive. So making them real, making them tangible and accessible to folks.
This was kind of funny. So this is downtown Norway, and this was our first EV charger we installed. And that was a gift from Revision Energy. Like, we had never thought we would go down like EV, like there was one EV in all of Norway back 5 years ago when we started. So they gave us this EV charger as a gift for helping them sell that solar farm to get subscribers. And we didn't know what to do with it. So finally we went to the town and said, hey, can we put it in your parking lot next to that kiosk, because there was power there. And then we did, and all of a sudden EVs were getting a little popular, so we decided to throw this little event, like a ribbon cutting, and we called it the EV Expo, and like tons of people came out. And then so that was so fun, we did it again the next year, and then the funders found us because we had made all this, gotten all this visibility around these 2 EV chargers, and they came to us and said, boy, you guys seem like you're the people in Western Maine that know about EV stuff, EV infrastructure, and they funded us. They've actually doubled our budget in a year and set us off on this project. So you just never know where things are going to lead.
And part of electric vehicles is also electric bikes. So we have some board members and community members who are really just advocates of electric bikes and being able to extend the way you use bicycles on the roadways. And here are some of the bikes that are available for riding at the expo. And Shelter. Shelter is another of our working groups. So we, as Shelter, we sort of started out looking at eco-village models and various building practices. But Shelter has really developed into a group that has the goal to really just promote affordable green housing in whatever ways possible. With inspired and homespun construction. We also look for, older buildings that are poorly insulated and have inefficient lighting and heating, and working with Efficiency Maine to make sure resources are in the hands of the community members to make changes that they need to make to save money on their own housing. And we also are interested in using local resources on a daily basis with the folks who build in our area, and also for folks who come in asking questions about Shelter to be able to provide them with resources about using traditional methods and using on-site materials. We also we worked on a project, a certified passive geothermal greenhouse project that really working with kids and teaching also these principles as we're building things in the community through partnerships with the local land trust to really sort of push forward the technologies that exist out there that folks may or may not have heard of, and put them into the hands of also the children to use and start experimenting and exploring. Here's the greenhouse that I was just talking about. This is the middle schoolers, and they're working at Roberts Farm, learning both building and greenhouse technologies. This project was an Eco Excellence Award recipient from Eco Maine in 2015. As you can see, some confidence building here with some folks learning how to use hammers and learning some beginning principles of timber framing. And there's the project in its group in almost completion. Through the shelter group, we also have tiny house charrettes where we help folks design and unpack what it is in tiny houses that's appealing and why it's an option that you may not have thought of. And here is one of the houses that we designed through a charrette that actually ended up being built. And how cute it is. And for shelter, we also are working with the nonprofit Window Dressers to bring window inserts into the community. So we have community builds where we get together and we measure windows, and these windows get inserts that are custom built through very precise measurements to go inside like an interior dormer in a sense that can be used year after year for very, very very heavily subsidized, so that folks who really need to maximize their home efficiency can do so through this means as a beginning.
Anybody wants to volunteer on our build outs next week at the UU Church in Norway? It's going to be, we're building like 175 inserts to build something. So.
Yep, and so Window Dressers, that's another one of our great partners. And lastly, food. We have our food working group where our overarching goals are to work for sort of access of healthy foods in our community. We work actively with the Wellness Collaborative Healthy Foods Group and the Maine Harvest Bucks group in our local co-op as well, and partner with them. We also look to do research and development in farming, processing, and partnering, and we model this in our community gardens with various projects like the food forest at the Allendale Community Garden. And we also partner with the Maine Food Strategy to continue to research and develop the way our local food system is moving along. And in terms of local production and distribution, we were looking at micro-distribution and processing, aggregation, food hub development, and all of these projects are the micro-distribution project has been implemented and is going through some growth stages, and other projects are still in the works. Edible Main Street is a project that we do every year, and you may have seen folks starting to do this also in other towns around, where we have edible vegetables and plants in these planter boxes on Main Street, where folks are encouraged to learn. There are cards where you can learn about the vegetables, and you can also eat. And here's what they look like in the beginning of the year. And volunteers coordinating to work on maintaining those boxes and keeping them full and fresh and bright. And we are also part of the Community Food Council in our food working group as part of the Maine Food Atlas and the local network of charters. This is where we do our FedCo bulk ordering. We look at workshops on mushroom cultivation and foraging, and we do permaculture workshops and permaculture design courses in collaboration with our partners. And then the Foothills Food Festival, you may have heard of or come to, which is an annual event that we put on that really targets getting everybody out of the community for that same common ground of food. We love food. We want everybody to love food. So everybody comes and sees the direct relationship between the farmers and the processors and the retail. And so everybody's working together to sample and taste and have a good time over food.
And beer.
And beer. We also, as I was sort of mentioning earlier, the Allendale Community Garden Food Forest is a project that we implemented where we are modeling how you can food forest as part of community gardening and as part of a teaching space. So the permaculture design course also works in this forest and has helped to design this forest, one of the classes. And the forest is now growing, and it has all kinds of relationships between tree crops and understory crops, and those companion relationships in planting that are really important, both to teach and to see in action.
Those are kids from our youth leadership program at the community garden, and we work with them in the food forest every summer, one day a week.
The youth leadership program is also very active with the Allendale Garden, where this site, the food forest, is located, and they learn so much throughout their summer of doing the leadership program, including permaculture. And here's some early pictures of the food forest right after it was planted. And we do pruning workshops as part of the continuation and maintenance of this food forest. All right, and so I just want to reiterate real quick also that CB, the most important point to take away in looking at all of these wonderful things that we're trying to do is how it's comprehensive model that really wants to cover many different bases at the same time. And that's because at CB we recognize the fact that these things are all interconnected. And so we can streamline some of our efforts. I know we have these 4 working group pillars, but really they blend much more than we can even describe sometimes. But the groups are starting to evolve and transform with one another, and that's the real model here, is that as a community organization working at a very small scale, we can be comprehensive and we can approach things from many different angles at once, and in doing so, we can make some of our programming more efficient. So I'll hand Scott back over to talk about some of the reasons behind this.
So, as you can see, there's a lot of small projects. Oh, I'm sorry.
Could I just ask a question before we lose that? What is micro-distribution? Can you describe that?
We had a grant early on to try to organize, because as a lot of you may know, local food doesn't necessarily mean lower carbon footprint. If you've got people driving around in their pickup trucks with a cooler full of greens, maybe not the most efficient way to do food. So we were trying to organize farmers and see if there was ways we could do some aggregation, get some distribution routes set up locally. It's still a kind of organizing farmers is like herding cats. It's been a bit of a challenge, but we soldier on. So most of the projects that you can see are fairly small in scale in terms of their actual impact in reducing carbon footprint or transforming. It's mostly awareness raising. We put the stuff out there, so we go to the towns and say, hey, we want to put an EV charger. Well, why do you want to do that? Well, because we have to change it, So we have this, it's a lot of conversations. Nothing at scale that's really transformative. But what I want to do is, I just want to look a little bit at the industrial food system to talk about the difference between an extraction-based degenerative economy and a regenerative or ecology-based economy. I think the food system is kind of the poster child for degenerative development at this point. I'm going to have to put my glasses on so I can see my notes here. So you can see, our food system right now, it's totally based on non-renewable inputs, ginormous carbon footprint. We're shipping food, 1,500 to 2,000 miles. All of our industrial farming pretty much has soil erosion, toxic runoff. We're pumping aquifers down. Part of this whole positive feedback loop is that our oceans no longer are supporting these ocean ecosystems. They're warming, they're acidifying, we have these dead zones. And we're losing agricultural land through desertification and also coastal flooding, because a lot of our ag land is at sea level. And despite what in the industrial agricultural complex will tell you, they're not feeding a hungry world. We have 1 billion hungry people. It's not working. They're extracting huge profits, not feeding a hungry world, and that's in all of our communities. This isn't just like in other faraway places with people that don't look like us. This is people in our communities that are hungry all the time, and so it's not working, and we need a revolution in food to change this. So, just want to talk a little bit about land use. This is what the country looks like. I've been teaching in Iowa a lot lately, teaching permaculture out there in the belly of the beast, and I'm starting to think more about this whole like the food system across the country. So about 20%, the brown dots there, squares, each one of these squares is 250,000 acres. And those brown dots represent agricultural, like cropland. And then the yellow is grazing land, and the green is forest land. And basically, the problem increasingly is who's managing all of that land. And it's either, and this goes right back to what you were talking about, Ethan, it's like it's managed by really wealthy people, corporations, or the government. And increasingly, the government and the corporations are becoming one and the same. So we've got all this land that's being managed, and it's being managed for profit. It's not being managed for sustainability or regeneration or ecosystem services or anything. It's basically being mined. This is sort of just what the distribution of that cropland looks like, and you can see the upper Midwest is where we grow a lot of food. But if you really look at what we're growing and the food that we actually eat, it's a very small part of that. It's about 2.5 of those Midwestern states. That's where we grow the food that we actually eat. So much of it is either grown for livestock or it's being exported for profit. And that's our water, that's our soil that's being exported for corporate profit, right? So what we need to think about is we could grow enough to feed the country on that 77.3 million acres there, which is tiny little bit of land. This kind of breaks down how that breaks down. This is all the stuff that we're growing. I don't want to go too deeply into that, but it is a small amount of our land mass that we could be growing our food on. So why do we have all these hungry people? It's kind of crazy. And we can't talk about food without talking about oil. So our food system right now is based on fossil fuels. We might as well be putting down a gallon of Pennzoil on our table every morning, and that's going to feed us for the day, maybe. We'll be a little bit hungry. It takes about 400 gallons of oil in this system, and we're talking about a food system, not just to grow the food, but the entire system. And a lot of that is distribution, processing, and marketing, and that takes a big chunk of our food dollar. And if a lot of that could be put back into production and localizing production, we could decrease the cost of food or keep it the same and increase the quality of our food and the nutrition. So if we're looking at this amount of oil in our food system, like what could go wrong with that? Right? I mean, it's a finite resource, right? Everybody knows about Hubbert's curve. He predicted we were going to peak out at about 80 million barrels of oil a day. 80 million barrels of oil a day we pump to keep this economy, this extraction-based economy going. And it started to tail off, but now it's not tailing off so much, and I call this the Hubbert-Howe hybrid because John Howe was a peak oil guy, and peak oil is sort of out of favor now because it didn't really happen, and we're the greatest oil-producing nation on earth again, and it's all good. So John Howe's like, well, I'll throw you another 500 billion barrels, just for the sake of argument, but you still look in, I have a 12-year-old son. In his lifetime, we're going to see depleting oil production. I mean, we're just not making more of this stuff in any kind of useful time frame. So, as oil production goes down, like how do we grow food? And this is where we were talking about biofuels. Like this may be a place where, you can't run a tractor or a combine without some kind of liquid fuel. It's just like this concentrated energy. To do that with electric is going to be really challenging. So there's going to be places where we're going to have to do that. But so how do we get this 500 billion, bonus barrels to keep this thing going for a little bit longer? And hopefully, if we're smart, we'll use that 500 billion barrels to transition to a renewable-based economy. But this is how we do it. We frack. And that's sort of what a fracking well looks like. And this is like incredibly energy intensive, so it takes a lot of energy to get a little bit of, so in the, back in the, Jed Clampett days, you could drill a hole in the ground, and get 100 barrels of oil for a barrel of oil invested, energy return on energy invested. Now it's like 3 or 5 or 7. So just to go after this oil, not to mention the pollution of water and the earthquakes and just all the crazy stuff that's happening around fracking. But this is what we're doing. And then this is like one well. So in communities that are lucky enough to be sitting on top of this shale oil or stuff, the roads are getting destroyed, their water tables are getting destroyed as these trucks roll in. And then these wells deplete super fast, so they just march them across the landscape. They just make more and more and more. They last a year or two, so they just keep going and drilling, which is great for jobs and stuff, but not so great for the land. Canadian tar sands, I'm sure you guys are all aware of that. This is another like huge ecological disaster to just keep extracting oil. And some of these things were like 3 barrels of oil out for 1 barrel in. This is like, what McKibben calls the carbon bomb. And we're not stopping. The economics of this are not so hot right now, but when oil price goes back up, the economics are going to be good again. This is why they want to build a KXL pipeline, because of this stuff in Canada. Those trucks coming down the road there, those are the size of like a 3-story house. These things are massive. And it's right in the Canadian boreal forest, so not only are we extracting and emitting all this carbon, we're destroying the forest and consequently polluting the Athabasca River, and downstream from there is where a lot of First Nation peoples are that rely on that as their food source. And this is just an ecological disaster to keep this extraction-based economy going, and especially our food system. So not so good. And this is why we do it. This is how our food system is based. It's just based on massive amounts of machinery, very few humans. I mean, I go to Iowa and I take my students from Iowa to Minnesota and Wisconsin. You never see a farmer. You never see a human being out in those fields. It's just huge equipment or nobody. So those are combines for harvesting soybeans. This is spraying Roundup, spraying glyphosate, which is no longer effective. Now we're doing 2,4-D. And you can see all those things that aren't in those perfect straight lines. Those are all the resistant weeds. So this is just a treadmill, like a pesticide, herbicide treadmill. It's just, it's simple biology. This resistance builds. And instead of using that as something that as a tool to understand how to breed using resistance, we're just fighting it, and more toxic chemicals, nitrate fertilizers, pumping water. So this is Garden City, Kansas. These are aerial photographs of Garden City, Kansas. They're infrared. And you can see in the 70s, we rarely really pumped water to get the yields that we needed. The farmers could rely on more predictable rainfall. But this increasing pressure on yields, it's very cheap to pump groundwater. So this is what we do now. All those circles are from these pivot irrigators. And in all of these major areas where they grow food, the aquifers, which are essentially fossil water, these things do not regenerate very fast, they're dropping, and they're dropping, and they're dropping. And these corporations who are running this agriculture system are making huge bank on the fact that they're pumping all this water to get more yields, but they're not leaving it for our kids. And they're drilling deeper, using more and more fossil fuels to lift that water, sometimes 1,000 feet or more. So it's like, just on and on. So then we've got climate change, and how is climate change going to play into this whole industrial ag model? Well, in some places it may not affect us at all, but in a lot of places what we're seeing is, it is warming. And Maine actually is one of the most, fastest warming places in the country. So in a lot of ways, the industrial ag system is a major driver of climate change. It also, as you'll see in a minute, can also be the solution, a big part of the solution for climate change. And I'll get to that before you guys all are ready to slit your wrists. The Gulf of Maine is warming faster than any similar body of work on the planet. We're up 6 degrees, and as this ocean conveyor is starting to slow down and all Greenland's melting down, it's like we've got water coming into the Gulf of Maine that's 11 degrees warmer than it was 50 years ago at the bottom of the Gulf of Maine. So that fishery is collapsing due to climate change. So there's we're not going to rely on the oceans to feed us. So that's a little issue with climate change. Who's had a Maine shrimp roll lately? Like, nobody, because there aren't any Maine shrimp really anymore because of the warming waters. And even on land, we've got all kinds of new pests that are not, like the sugar maples and blueberry crops are under attack because it doesn't get cold enough anymore. So just the warming is affecting our food system, and then this like extreme weather events. So we're getting all this flooding. This was Hurricane Irene in Vermont, 500-year flood. 2 years later, they have a 100-year flood. And we were just in Iowa, and everywhere we went, every farmer we talked to was like, "Oh my God, I've never seen this happen." Minnesota had tornadoes. We've never had tornadoes here before. They had 8 tornadoes in like a week. It's just like the weather's going crazy, which is really affecting the ag system too. So it's like washing farms into rivers. And this is, of course, Hurricane Florence. This is a confined animal feeding operation in North Carolina. Those buildings are full of pigs. They don't let the pigs out when floods happen anymore because it's bad press when they get all those pictures of these pigs swimming for their lives. And these manure lagoons are all flooding, and it was just ecological disaster. Food system, just ecological disaster for the water table. We have all these nutrients running off of the fields in these kind of more normal extreme weather events. So we've got soil erosion. Everywhere we grow, we till the ground, we have soil erosion, so we're losing anywhere from 1 ton to 8 tons an acre per year of soil from most of our productive ag lands. Nitrate pollution, that's Iowa up there where I've been working, and people are like up in arms because there's no fresh water in the state that's safe to drink. It's all at high nitrate levels and glyphosate and all kinds of stuff. And these are like serious stuff. It's like carcinogenic at certain levels. And Iowa, which is way the heck up there where those darkest patches are, is actually the biggest cause of the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And every place we do agriculture in the world, based on this extractive model, we've got dead zones at the mouths of all of our rivers. The Gulf of Mexico has a seasonal dead zone that's 8,000 square miles. And the only reason that this gets to keep happening is because the corporations come in with lawyers and banks, and they take over the land. And in Jefferson County, Iowa, where I teach, they have lawyers and they fight. They have enough wealthy people and enough enlightened people in the area that they fight, and they actually have been keeping them at bay in their county, but then they just go somewhere else and grease a few politicians' palms, and off we go. And of course, there's the drought. This was Maine in 2016. Flood, drought. Some of the major grain-producing areas in the world get these 100-year droughts. So, food system, industrial food system, as far as I'm concerned, is just a train wreck. This is the last depressing thing I'm going to show you. So we're cutting down the rainforest, and now we've kind of put a moratorium on that, so we've moved over to the Cerrado, and we're just cutting it down. This is some aerial photographs or satellite photographs. This is 1 year. Those are 40-acre plots to grow soybeans. The next year, this is 18 million acres a year of just cutting down forests to grow soybeans so that we can feed pigs in confinement. This is in Iowa. There's 50 million pigs in confinement. Well, I take that back. There's only 25 million at any one time, but they grow 50 million pigs a year on soybeans and corn. And they grow them in these confinement operations, and that's another huge source of pollution. And they do the same thing with chickens, and we do the same thing with cows. So this is what our agricultural system looks like, right? So what are the opportunities? And this is where we get to regenerative agriculture. And this is where if we democratize the food system, and we can do this, and this is more of a human scale operation. There's a lot of people working really hard on this regenerative agriculture. So instead of letting those nutrients run off, we keep them on the land. We sequester carbon in the soil. We think about what we're growing in terms of nutrition instead of bushels or calories per acre. We focus on local production and distribution. We bring back biodiversity on our farms. We take that food waste out of the system. Now we waste 40% of the food that we produce, but by the time it gets to the consumer or post-consumer, it's like almost half of what we grow isn't even getting used. So that's like a huge, and by design, it's not redistributed back into the system because it's not good for corporate profits if we're giving away all this free food that's getting wasted. And furthermore, if we're talking about regenerative agriculture, we're talking about regenerating farming and farming communities and putting dignity back into the system. So what does that look like? Well, this is in the middle of corn soy country, and this is Mark Shepard's place in Viola, Wisconsin, and I take my students here every time in my permaculture class because this is at scale permaculture. This is 110 acres. So you'll notice that there's none of those straight rows because he's designing in response to the land. So he's observing the land and laying out his farm accordingly. He's also growing tree crops. There's thousands and thousands of trees on this land. The trees sequester carbon. They produce nutrient-dense food. He's doing a breeding project on chestnuts. He put 10,000 chestnuts in the ground and has been taking out the diseased ones and breeding his own chestnuts. This is a hazelnut crop. A lot of these farmers out there that are doing this regenerative agriculture based on these tree crops, they'll tell you anything you can do with corn, you can do with a chestnut. Anything you can do with a soybean, you can do with a hazelnut. Much more nutrient-dense food. They sequester carbon. You never till that ground. It's a much more sane kind of thing. All his windbreaks on his farm are nut pines, so they're productive growing food and providing for windbreaks. This is a alley of chestnuts. You can see all that grass, that beautiful grass on the ground. Well, he'll bring in grazing animals, and the grazing animals will do all this work that we would normally do with fossil fuel-driven mowers, right? So now you've got animals are growing the chestnuts, and the grass is growing the animals, and you start to get this cycle that emulates more of a natural cycle. So we're in that soil, we're building carbon, we're taking it back out of the air, we're storing it in the tree, so we're drawing it back down. So even if we stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow, unless we draw it down, we're still screwed. So this kind of agroecology, silvopasture systems can really do that. And you can still grow in the alleys. So when he puts these alleys 60 feet apart, he can grow annual vegetables and grains and stuff in the alleys. And our agriculture could look a little more like this. So if you kind of think about Maine, we've already got all these trees, right? What if we had a new kind of agriculture that was actually in harmony with our forests instead of, because we can't cut the forest here. 150 years ago, we had 80% of Maine was clear cut, and we were tilling it, and we lost half of our topsoil. We can't afford to do that again. So when we ramp up this local food production, we've got to think more like nature. Just to give you a little hint of what it looks like around Mark Shepard's place, it's like that's a biological desert. That's what the Midwest is. It's a biological desert of corn and soybeans, and they have these little runnels now that they grow grass in to keep some of the soil erosion off. But it's you go out there, it's hot, it's dusty, there's nothing alive. You go into his place, and there's birds and bugs and bees and bunnies running all over the place, and there's like hundreds of species of plants and animals, and it's cool and it's beautiful. And I think there is a relationship between beauty and sustainability. And they run their whole operation on a wind generator, just as a little bonus. So when we've been looking a lot at our area. We kind of work with our land trust as the same kind of service area, and just in these 11 towns in what we call the Western Foothills, we've got 40,000 acres of potentially farmable land. And back to what you were saying, Ethan, it's like, how do we get people on that land to do the right thing and to start building this local food thing? And I think we need to keep working together on this commoning of that land to make sure that we don't pave over it or just run all the topsoil into the rivers or whatever. So I want to talk about this one project. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of Regeneration International. They're a kind of an offshoot of the Organic Consumers Association. I highly recommend just getting on OCA website, checking these guys out. I've had the amazing fortune to hook up with a couple of their principal people, especially this guy, Reginaldo Haslett-Morikine. He's developed this model for poultry-centered regenerative agroforestry. So basically instead of putting chickens, and he's focusing on the chicken first, because every culture in the world uses chickens. There's 20 billion chickens on the planet right now, and they're basically being grown in a destructive, degenerative way. And he's from the jungles of Guatemala. So there's two things there. He knows that chickens are jungle fowl. They want to live in the woods, in the forest. And he also thinks like a revolutionary. He's got tactics. He's got revolutionary tactics, and he's really keen to take down this industrial food juggernaut and kind of cut to the jugular. And he thinks the chicken, we can outproduce them with chickens, and we can win with the chickens. Chicken revolution is coming. And so basically he's building a food forest, and then he's running chickens in the food forest. I mean, this is, Rachel knows that drawing, right? That's the food forest. That's like canopy, lower canopy. Yeah, right? This is what we do in permaculture. This is what we're designing. Well, he's kind of scaling it up a little bit. He's got 3-acre food forest, and it's kind of systemized. He's got rows of hazelnuts so he can run machine harvest. But the chickens do all the work. They do the fertilizing, the pest control, the grazing, the mowing, all that stuff. So he's growing double his hazelnuts yield about twice of what a typical commercial hazelnut bush would do. He's growing elderberries in there. He also grows annual crops. He grows his native corn, Indian corn. He grows some sunflowers. And then he runs these chickens out there. And the chickens are like super happy because this is what chickens want to be doing. They don't want to be in a huge barn eating dry corn and crappy water. They want to be running around chasing bugs and expressing their full chicken existence in a happy way until they have this one bad day at the end. But these are happy chickens. They have a winter sunroom. They're like, they've got it going on. And these were the 2 days before they were about to be processed, and they were just beautiful. They were kind of a mixed breed. They were more of a heritage, but they're also pretty productive. This is the paddock that he had just taken him out the week before, and you can see that just regenerating back, and then the chickens, will come back, and so they're eating a lot of it. So it's more nutrient-dense food. This model that he's got can be done by a small farmer. You don't have to have a corporation. You don't have to have Tyson come in and say, we're going to give you 1 million seedlings, or hatchlings. You're going to put them in this, this exact greenhouse. You're going to feed them this. You're going to give them these antibiotics, these hormones. We'll be back in 9 weeks. We're going to take the chickens and write you a check, unless something goes wrong, and then good luck. It's your problem, not ours. That's the model. Farmers are over a barrel. It's not dignified. It's not farming. It's factory farming, right? This puts power back into farmers. Reddy started out as an organizer of immigrant farmers in the Northfield, Minnesota area. So he's really got this mentality of like wanting to re-empower the farmer. So it gets back again to this economic democracy, and he's getting this model set up to the point where banks are going to start loaning money to do this. It costs $50,000 to put one of these modules together. And once he conquers the world with chickens, onto pigs. Get the pigs out of the CAFOs and get them out on the land. And this is at the organic compound, which is just affiliated with the Main Street Project. And they used these 8 pigs to till an acre. And right after we left, the pigs went off and had their bad day. And then they planted garlic in there. They planted 25,000 heads of garlic where the pigs had just done all the work. So there's ways to do this. And these pigs were like 300-pound puppy dogs. We came around that corner, we were on this tour, a miserable day with my students, cold, rainy day, and they were in that little trailer back there because they had trained them to just live in the trailer for the last month so that, when they have that day, they can just close the trailer and drive off. And all of a sudden we hear this like clanging, crazy noise, and these pigs come running out, and everybody's like, whoa! And the pigs come over, and the next thing I know, they're like laying on their backs, and everybody's petting their tummies, and they're all like, these like giant puppy dogs. So they're, again, expressing their full pig existence. So again, back to what we can do here. Like, what if in our kids' lifetime, Western Maine could look like that, where they've been doing sustainable regenerative agriculture for centuries and centuries. This is Southern Europe. This is Portugal, or China, where they did it where they've been doing it for 4,000 years. Not doing so hot right now, but when people are on the land at human scale, they figure out how to do this. And how to do it in a way that's regenerative and that is going to support them for centuries because they didn't have access to this brute force of fossil fuel, and this profit motive, right? They were just growing food. They didn't have currency. I mean, it was like, you can't make profit if you can't sell your stuff, so they just grow what they needed and took care of the land because they knew that was their thing. In summary, regenerate, don't degenerate. Let's renew our natural capital. Work with nature, not against it. We got to account for all the costs of this system. We've got to share the surplus, bring this back, develop this human scale technology, and then share. Then, as Ken Moore says, rip off and duplicate R&D. Somebody has a model that's working, let's just keep going with it. So